Hello everyone, welcome to Timeless Voyager, where the knowledge is timeless and you are the Voyager. I am your host, Bruce Stephen Holmes, so strap your cosmic seatbelts on and prepare for a bumpy ride today. Today's guest is ufologist and activist Ed Komarek. Now, I'm going to play a short video that will give you a clear introduction to Ed Komarek's work, and then I'll introduce you to today's guest, Ed Komarek.
In July of 1993, a few months after the inauguration of President Bill Clinton, and while the first Jurassic Park was still in theaters, a small group of UFO enthusiasts led a demonstration in front of the White House, demanding UFO transparency. The demonstration was led by a group called Operation Right to Know, and it received a fair amount of mainstream media coverage, especially for the 1990s. Though it may not have had the results some had hoped for, I think Operation Right to Know is still an important chapter in UFO history, worth studying and remembering. For this video, I was able to interview two of the co-founders of Operation Right to Know, Ed Komarek and Mike Jameson. These days, Ed Komarek lives in the backwoods of Georgia in a cabin he built himself. He has written books on UFOs and forest fire management.
One night, or I think it was one morning, I wandered out in the cold and walked down a adjoining street, and there was this little new age bookstore there, and I thought, that's interesting, and so I knocked on the door and went in, and it was just like I felt like right at home. There was like incense and crystals and chimes, and but most important of all, books on UFOs, reincarnation, out-of-body experience, near-death experiences, all this sort of stuff. And so I started reading books in all these areas, and then later on, over time, I began concentrating more and more on UFOs because it's one of the things you could kick the tires on, that there were, supposedly actually crashed UFOs with that were material and solid and whatever. And so it started so that stimulated my interest, and I studied up on the literature. And sometimes I'd come home after I'd gone a couple years of college up there. I quit, but I would come home and build a small cabin, or what they call a tiny home, and I would spend the winters reading up on all this subject matter, particularly on UFOs. So I got a broad understanding of the whole field in probably around 1969, 1970. And then over time, I went from reading the materials to actually joining MUFON, became a section director, Mutual UFO Network, investigative body. That's an international body. And as a section director, and got some investigative skills involving UFOs. And then I started off my own UFO investigating network within about 30 or 50 miles of where I live here in southwest Georgia, just in Georgia, north of Tallahassee, Florida. And I started picking up cases about once a week through people who would call me on the telephone. I got messages I got material out in the press and whatever. And there was about, one or two UFOs sighted, or some that people had sighted a long time before, came out and contacted me by phone. And then I started getting involved with clusters of UFOs north of Cairo that eventually led me to the people that actually claimed contact. And I actually saw a craft myself, and two of the craft followed me home just to see who I was, just because I was sticking my nose into their business. And so they followed me home after midnight and flew off the corner of my property.
Despite merciless heat, some 100 people marched in a circle in front of the White House today. Their demand, respect for their cause. One claims first-hand knowledge of extraterrestrial life. Another says she's seen a flying saucer. All want more reports of full disclosure of close encounters with UFOs. CNN's John Holloman has the story.
If this group of 100 demonstrators is correct, the U.S. government is covering up the most important secret of all time. alien beings who have made contact with Earthlings.
People or whatever actually going out in front of the White House with the banner and signs and stuff demonstrating in the UFO cover-up and Roswell and signs that we had all made up and whatever. And that, I don't know if that image was picked up in the New York Times or not, but later we had a GAO demonstration that Layden Douglas headed up, that I wasn't involved in it, but the New York Times was there, and they took a photograph there that they still use for UFO articles that they're putting out, and they're no longer debunking the subject and are actually, with Leslie Kean and whatever, actually helping to to end the cover-up.
Welcome back. UFOs, the government keeping documents secret, proving that there were UFOs that landed on this country? I don't know. Well, I'm not sure whether or not information is really being collected. I've looked at a number of the documents that, frankly, are very hazy in terms of what they say, but you've got guys like Ed Komarick out here. You could just round up guys like Ed, ask them a variety of questions, and test the veracity. For example, how would you know if what Ed reported was the truth, or frankly, a figment of his imagination, or something else out there?
Well, I presume if it were just Mr. Komarick making a sighting report, I probably wouldn't be extremely interested in the subject.
He kind of put us down a little bit, but it was okay. And, you know, as you know, Bruce Nycoby's been involved for a long time in funding UFO research and whatever.
Welcome to the program, Ed.
Hi, Bruce.
Great to have you here via telephone. I have a lot of plans, but I think now that people have seen the video, they kind of understand who you are and what you've done in the past. And you've been on many, many, many programs. So you're just new to the Timeless Voyager audience, or those who have not heard of you before. Before I start, I have a whole list of stuff up here on my other computer, which I'll be referring to. We're going to get a lot of our questions and things from your articles, and you've written a lot of articles. Maybe you could just give people an understanding as to what these articles are about and why you write them.
Okay, my book is becoming a little dated. The exopolitics book and the Enlightenment book, it's been about 10 years, I guess. So I decided recently, I guess about a year ago, to start, pick things back up, catch people up on my current thinking and what I've been studying and learning. And so I shared it on these articles, starting, you know, not too far way out there, but far enough. And then it kind of gets deeper and deeper as I go down through the articles over this past year.
All right, and I think that's a good way to start. The first article that I was looking at, and that's the one I'm actually going to get down through here. I got to bring this thing up here. The one that I was looking at that kind of got my interest right away was, could some alien encounter cases be real? So I always wonder, like, how does a person decide what's real and what isn't real? So you must have some information on this. So can you focus on that for a moment?
It's very similar to, you know, somebody determining whether a $20 bill is counterfeit or not. And even the experts get fooled sometimes, but generally they don't. That happens like with paintings, you know, fraudulent paintings, and it can even fool the experts. But it's just basically what you really do is you have to have a broad understanding of the subject matter to the extent that you can see issues and problems that crop up as being counterfeit, of not correlating with the data as you know it.
So give us an example of, let's say, two possibilities, one that you found was real and maybe one that you found that wasn't real.
Okay. One nice little book is called, that I just read here not too long ago, is called UFOs Are With Us, Take My Word by Leo Dworshak. And it's a little book about two little boys that were out in the wilds back in the 30s of the wilds of North Dakota, and they encountered a craft down some distance away, and there looked like people walking around underneath it. And when they went to investigate it, they hit a force field that stopped them, and so they just sat down and watched. And then they came back other times, and slowly the occupants of the craft lowered the force field down to where the boys were actually eventually, as their fear dissipated over time, they were actually met the occupants and had discussions with them in the craft. And some really interesting information happened right then, or is conveyed right then, was that the ship had both a force field protecting it from a distance from anybody from a distance, but it also had a time field that also protected them from any kind of unexpected encounters, as in this case, and that it showed to the boys that they could actually stop a bird or a missile in flight in time, and this is really interesting to me because it crops up as a pattern in a lot of other different cases. And as they were sitting with the force field was, separating them before they actually went to the
Could I interrupt?
They saw a jackrabbit hit the
Let me interrupt you.
Bounce off.
Let me interrupt you for 1 second because I want to ask you this. How old were these boys? Do you know?
They were young, I think. I have to look here in the book, but I think they're around 6, 7, 8 years old.
Okay.
And there were two brothers.
So the reason I ask that is because the kind of knowledge base that they would have had to report this would not be
at that time in the early 1930s.
Okay, that's important.
Yeah, you're catching on what I'm saying here. And so, and they described other things in the time field is particularly of interest because I ran to it here even locally from some people that became contact friends, but were really low on the socioeconomic scale. And one of them said that these two Nordic females that were studying plants had a box, and it was a time stasis box. Essentially, they just said it was a box where they stopped time. So you put your specimens in the box, and so you don't need refrigeration or anything. So it's just the time is slowed down to a point or stop that it's preserved, and I'd assume that could happen with a live animal. And in fact, there's many other encounter cases in which this silence descends when the craft comes in, and there's no sound. The insects, hear any chirping. It's just like super silence. And apparently, Preston Dennett had a really good article on one of them where they stopped the people on the street and everything were stopped dead and like frozen. But the one individual that they were communicating with was allowed to stay in their time, and he communicated with them. And then they put him back, and then they started up time again. And the people didn't even that had been frozen had no idea what had happened.
Now, before
you have all these correlations, and time. The time field goes way back to Arthur C. Clarke book's Childhood's End, in which the ETs would actually stop the time or slow down the time of the individual, and they could move around that individual and essentially be invisible. And so that time field material goes way back, and those patterns, all fit in very well with this case. So this case gives you a lot more detail, not only that, but a lot of other things as far as inside the ship and that sort of thing. Now, another case.
Wait a minute. Wait, let's go. Let's stop for 1 second. Before you go on to the cases, because you're telling me about cases that I think you're using as illustrations of real cases. But what?
Yeah, this is I believe is a real case.
Right.
UFOs are with us. Take My Word by Leo Dorstick. It's a little small book. You can get it from Amazon.
So, what about some example or an example of a case that you believe is not a real case?
Okay, that was what I was about.
Okay, sorry. Go ahead.
Okay, here recently I wrote a whole article on this guy called Pelesian Diaries. Voyager Diaries, in which he supposedly met in the swamps of Florida female extraterrestrial that had a lineage of royalty that made a mistake and got her foot caught in mangrove roots, and he came up and saved her and helped her get out of the roots and developed a relationship with her. And then he gets into her and communication with her and her friends, and actually travels to other star systems, and where meetings going on between extraterrestrials as part of a galactic confederation and all this. And it sounded pretty good, and I wrote it up. And but then my friend Mike started doing some investigating, and he went to the guy's blog, and he was really a right-wing kind of conspiracist. But even worse, he was actually was getting money from claiming to be a saving children all around the world, his company or whatever, which really didn't exist. The only thing he had was a GoFund operation in which he made about $12,000 off of the public. And the pictures that he used as children that he was saving, he actually copped off of legitimate programs. And so there was a lot of flags lit up. And I talked to him for about an hour. And then it became evident after I knew this that, he was deceiving me and the public and whatever.
That's pretty fraudulent, huh?
Well, there's a lot of it in the field. But I think he wrote a second book, Politician Diaries, but he no longer interests me, In fact, I was writing on maybe a book of called Conversations with Extraterrestrials, and I had that in the book, and then I was going to delete it, but then I thought maybe I ought to leave it there so it shows, how easily a person can be deceived if they don't go in and do some research and get to know the person, and get know the person directly.
I can see that.
So I hope that answers your question.
Oh, it definitely does, and I think a lot of the people listening are probably happy that we got that straight. That was quite an example of a case that was not real. There are plenty of them.
Tom DeLongo, who's into a lot of encounter cases and whatever out there in Arizona. I think it's Arizona, and supposedly pretty knowledgeable. And he's even written that he's been taken for a ride so many times. But he was promoting this, and then when I gave the material to him, he just kind of ignored it. So he just got taken again and again. Some people they just get taken over and over again by these fraudulent people that have different agendas. Either they want some attention, or they wanted to create a cult, or they, So people are, people have a lot of different motivations and agendas other than the truth, and so the only way to really sort that all out, when people are your eyes and ears, you got billions of people that are your eyes and ears all over the planet, is that you just have a broad understanding of encounter cases to the point that you can see patterns both that fortify that, you believe that person is a real case or obviously a fraud.
So we talked about this on a previous phone call where we talked about the idea of the scientific method and the repetition of certain types of information that repeats over and over again is a clue. Right. It's a clue like a detective would use to discover, who the person was, the perpetrator, so on and so forth.
Yeah. We have different systems. We have the criminal justice system that works with witnesses, and you get cross-examined and you try to figure out what the truth is, and people go to jail for crimes by witness testimony alone. So witness testimony is valuable, but people, can't think beyond a certain stage because there's been this 80-year-old cover-up, and they say, well, show me the physical evidence and then I'll believe, but they can't think any further because the physical evidence is being withheld, and so you got no other option but to work with witness testimony and basically what cultural anthropologists do, and they do these, and that's what's so important about Archie Clark is she was an indigenous cultural anthropologist, and so she had the skills of the scientific, skills of a anthropologist to be able to correctly interview these people and protect their identities, and the whole community had great respect for her. So you can trust her as an investigator, but you can also pretty well trust her cases, because the cases that she done are all protected. 95% of the people had everything to lose and nothing to gain, and would only give their cases to her if she gave them anonymity.
So let's be more specific about Artie Clark, because you know a lot about her. You talk a lot about her books, but why don't you give a little bit of background on who she was? She's not in good health, but why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about her?
Okay, she was an indigenous professor at Montana State University, and working with the whole indigenous community all the way, Washington D.C. and in government and in areas where she collected a lot of these cases, actually. But she did all of this collection of cases on the sidelines. But she had her own contact experience when she was a child, going out to an outhouse that she sort of alludes to. If you read all the books, you'll put all the little pieces together, and that these human extraterrestrials were actually mentoring her, and some of her cases, I think they helped her find some of these cases and whatever. So you're not really just dealing with an individual, you're dealing with a whole extraterrestrial group program designed to brief humanity in a balanced manner, rather than in a, with partial truths designed to manipulate the populace or whatever. So these extraterrestrials and Artie Clark both, I think, wanted to get the truth out to the public as to extraterrestrial reality. And the way that she did it was just really ingenious. She just told this story that from highly predatory to highly extraterrestrial races by just the selections that she put in her books. And so once people understand that it's kind of like as below, so above, then you get to the point, in your thinking, you can begin to think about alliances, NATO-like organizations, confederations, federations, because just like in nature and just like here on Earth, wherever you have both conflict, competition, and cooperation. And it's no different out in the universe, and the laws of nature are just like the laws of physics. They go out across the universe, because possibly we live in some kind of a holographic universe in which if it's happening here, it's happening everywhere else.
Or vice versa. If it's happening there, it's happening here. People
Right. And we can understand this. We don't have to be afraid of some of the destructive or predatory extraterrestrials. It's just like New York City. You don't quit going to New York City because you could get mugged on some side street or whatever. You just learn not to go into those areas.
Right. But the problem with that analogy, not that it's not a good analogy, but the problem with that analogy is that people don't actually know. They haven't been educated yet as to who the predators are and who they aren't. Let's talk about some of those predator type ETs, and let's compare them to the more beneficial ETs.
Okay. Well, whenever you have low situational awareness, whether you've never been to New York City like me, I'd never been there before, and I kind of had old genes, and I walked down a lot of these side streets where if you had been in a business suit, you'd probably been mugged. But I was fortunate that I didn't get mugged. But if you have, high situational awareness of New York, you know where to go and where not to go. And the problem is that people don't have that situational awareness when you're dealing with extraterrestrials. And so when the government starts leaking out information, and that's coming out broadly through all the abductees, thousands and, tens of thousands, maybe even millions of abductees that are being abducted apparently by this Manus-type insectoid society that basically seems to be in control of what most people know about the so-called Greys as more of a working class, but they often see the insectoids in the background. But the Greys are the working class, basically, are the ones that pick people up and do the procedures on them and take their eggs and ove them and are doing the cross-breeding operations, whatever. But in the background, there's occasionally people will become aware of an insectoid that's very tall, 8, 10, 12 feet, seems to have, according to this autopsy report, that Russian autopsy report that I wrote in one of the articles, has compound eyes just like a mantis or termites or ants, and that they believe that the Russians believe that they evolved from arthropods that came onto land, but here on Earth, the arthropods never developed lungs or be able to process oxygen very well, so they never could get very big, except in the Carboniferous when there was higher oxygen levels, and they did get quite a bit bigger. You had 6-foot centipedes and dragonflies that were 2 feet across. But as soon as the oxygen levels went back down, the insects got smaller and smaller again to where they were before. So they never solved that problem on this planet. Now the person that kind of went over that article drew a lot of suppositions or whatever that just weren't correct, that it was happening on this planet, but they ignored the fossil record, because if insects had developed lungs and grew to a large size, we would see it in the fossil record. And so this is one species that essentially is farming us just like we farm cattle or sheep or whatever. We have something they need, which is the genetic material, and they just pick people up and they take it. And the problem with abductees is that they're like people, animals been tranquilized. You know, you see the animal sees the helicopter approach, and then it feels the sting and it jumps when it's injected, and then it runs, and then the next thing it's got this jumbled memories, and the next thing it knows, it's kind of staggering off and looking back, and the helicopter is leaving. And abductees are in that same kind of situation, because they've been subjected not only to the mental influences of these very powerful beings, but they also have atmospheric gases, according to Artie Clark in one of her cases, that basically turns you kind of into a zombie, that you can be, or you don't cause trouble on the craft and that sort of stuff, and you do, and whatnot. And so one of Marty's cases that's so valuable is called Masters of Deception. And this lady, apparently 1 out of 20,000 people that get abducted, which indicates there's a lot of people being abducted, and a lot of them that don't even know about it, and a lot of them, the memories only come through later. But 1 out of 20,000 people that get abducted don't remembers everything in detail and is not affected by the atmospheric gases.
So they do.
To study them.
These people do remember what happened, right?
Yeah, 1 out of 20,000. This 1 out of 20 do, and the insectoids actually communicated with her and put her through some tests, trying to figure out why it was that she was immune to atmospheric gases and their mental control.
So that kind of like changes the whole perspective, because that means that the abductees that we know of, okay, the stories that we hear, are from a very select group of people who do not react to the gas that's in the vehicle. This
particular case, but most of them do, and then they start to get some of their memories back and flashbacks.
Later on.
They often feel traumatized and abused, but they don't understand why, and it starts coming back out in their dreams, just like somebody that's been, in Iraq or Iran, and it comes back out, and even under hypnosis. But then there's the question: is how much is the hypnosis affecting their memories or whatever? So, what these cases where the people are not affected, 1 out of 20,000, are just really valuable cases to have, because the people involved have full knowledge of what's going on, and they give a lot of detail. Like she says, they treat the resistors, the ones that try to resist even in spite of the atmospheric drugs, badly. They actually deliberately hurt them because they don't like people that are not complacent. And so the resistors get a lot more grief, and a lot of those resistors end up on the internet, and they're very angry and upset as their memories come back and whatever, and they tend to think that all extraterrestrial races here on the Earth, like Summers, group or whatever, are predatory, but that's just simply not true. That's just a partial truth.
Okay, so now let's let's give everybody a break from that side of it. Let's talk about some of the extraterrestrials that are basically good people.
Okay.
I mean, the Nordics, I guess the Nordics come to mind. There are more than that, I think, but
Yeah, as long as you're dealing with a free Nordic and not one of the humans that the insectoids have essentially bred that looks just like them.
Okay, wait, you're coming, you're going back the other side. Leave that alone for a minute.
Okay, so how do you tell the difference between the two?
Well, you can't.
And,
I mean,
you can't unless, again, it's like same with the counterfeit bill. Unless you spend some time with the beings, just one meeting, you might not be able to tell. But if you get to know them, as become friends with them, like my local contact people did, then that gets sorted out over time. And so what happened with me is I've read all this material and stuff going way back into the early 70s and whatever, but I've developed my own intelligence gathering network here locally, and it led me to 3 encounter people right in my neighborhood here. And I got to know them, became friends with them, saw the craft followed me home, never had a face-to-face meeting, but everything that they say, I believe, is true because it correlates with the literature. And they were just really low on the socioeconomic scale, and nobody would have believed them anyway if they had talked, and went public or something.
So
they were dealing with 2 different types, and one was the barrel-chested short type that claimed to have come from a star system, I think 12 and a half light years away, which I assume, the gravity might have been a little more than what we have here, being that they were kind of stocky and barrel-chested. And that they were doing environmental investigations, and historical research that they told the contact person who ended up traveling with them. And I don't like to use this person's name, so I just use Kay. And what Kay did was that he was down fishing down in a swamp, and he was in a creek that had kind of high sides to it. And so apparently the craft, when it came down, didn't pick him up on their scanners. And I think 5 of these guys walked down the ramp, went out and took some water samples, and they were kind of standing around joking with each other. And he kind of came up around a tree and was watching them. And then they started to go back to the craft, and he stepped out and said, "I just want to meet you." And they started to run up the ramp. They turned and looked at him because they'd kind of been caught, unawares. And then they started laughing, and he started laughing. They came back down, and they actually became friends, and he began traveling with them and actually described how that craft was maneuvered. It had like a ball, and you moved your hand over the ball to move it forward or backwards or sideways or whatever. And then it had a system on it for disguising the crafts where you couldn't see the craft with it. That was turned on. And a lot of detail that, came out later and whatever. So he got to know these types. And then through them, I think he got to know the Nordic types who are also operating the area, who are also doing the same kind of research. There were 2 men that were Nordic humans, a typical Nordic human of about 6'2", I guess, or whatever. Arnold Schwarzenegger type,
right.
Bodybuilder structure. And the females, but he was only dealing with the males. But another contact person there that I met through all these was dealing with females, and they're very beautiful people and whatever. And they got perfect complexions and all that because basically they're genetically modified organisms that can live to 1,000 years or more. Whereas we're kind of the fruit flies of the galaxy. Most of these beings all live for extended lifetimes because of the technologies involved and whatever. But he got to know them, the Nordic types, and he had a lot of stories that have a lot of detail in them. And that one time they were visiting him in his house, and they couldn't beam out because his nosy jet was circling around the area and was up to something. And so they had to stay in there for a while, and they didn't eat meat, but he offered them a beer, and they drank a beer along with him. And on the table, he had a copy of Penthouse magazine, and one of the Nordics picked it up and he said, "Why do you need this?" And so they don't know everything. So they're learning just like we're learning. So they're involved in these studies, probably updating databases that they have on Earth that are pretty vast, I would imagine, because if they're doing this in my local neighborhood, there's got to be a lot of them all over this planet, and that kind of ties in with some other cases of a Nordic base possibly being up in Tennessee, about underground up in Tennessee, Alabama area, whatever, that they possibly operating up. Whereas a lot of ETs, like the ones that were Leo Dorset, there was only 12. I think there was 2 groups of 6, and they flew directly to their star system, which I don't remember for sure. It might have been in another galaxy.
Okay, you have an article. It's article number 8, actually. And the title of the article got me. It says, "Who is Ed Kamarick and what does he know?" And then you have a portal that people can go to. I'll make sure that portal goes up somewhere. But my question, excuse me, is this. Why don't you give people a little bit of a background as to where all of this information that you know about has been coming from?
What do you mean?
Well, for example, you talk about you subscribed back in the 70s to a contactee, the Bearden newsletter.
Yeah.
Bill Moore's Focus Journal.
Okay.
So you have a lot of people that you have, quote unquote, studied with or learned from. And I think it's good for people to know that anyone, the purpose of me asking this question is, people sometimes have this I don't know, passive view where, oh, that's interesting, that's fantastic, that's amazing, and then they just okay, what's next? It's not like they're active. You're an active person. You studied it, you learned what these things were, you speak about it, so you've immersed yourself in the field consciously. It's not like this thing just happened. And I think people would probably be interested in a little bit about how you made this happen so that you could be so knowledgeable.
Okay, I was born into a family on a plantation here down in Southwest Georgia, and I grew up in some of the top early ecologists on the planet. And Herb Stoddard was one of my mentors, and he was known for being the father of wildlife management and also one of the founders of ecology, and was a good friend of Aldo Leopold. So I grew up in nature and got to be pretty much of a know-it-all. And as I grew up and went to college, I went to a local college and decided I wanted to go to the University of Alaska. We had made trips as a family up to Alaska and to Canada and whatever. And so I really loved my parents, but I felt I really needed to develop my own identity, and living, close to them, was affecting me. And so that's when I really began to diverge from, their interests and went to the University of Alaska. And there was this little bookstore one day when we were playing pool about 40 below zero. And I went and got out and walked to a back street, and there was this little New Age bookstore. And I said, opened the door up, and to the smell of incense and chimes and books on every possible subject matter: near-death experiences, UFOs, psychic phenomena, transcendental meditation, all these different books, and I just felt really at home. And so that's where it really started. And it also started sending me into an existential crisis, because all this was so different than what I had been led to believe. And so I hit rock bottom in this existential crisis, and I went kind of deep down and got very depressed over a period of a couple of years, and went deep down inside of myself. And I said, if there's not any more to life than what normal people are living, I don't want to live. And these 3 beings that were like dewdrops in the morning, like I want to describe, with light shining on the dewdrops, said to me, your path is the truth, your vehicle is honesty, and fuel is your vehicle for love, in a thought form that's completely outside of any normal kind of possibilities or whatever. And that really turned me around. And then I realized at that time, as I kind of gave myself over to them and said, this is really too complex for me to work my way out of this whole situation I'm in, and it's what's going on the planet and everything else, and just can you give me some guidance? And I realized that right off the bat that I would have to clean up my mental and emotional baggage and separate myself from destructive thoughts and whatever. And that's when I got into transcendental meditation and whatever that helped a lot to back me off and to kind of reestablish contact with my source. And then I developed this really strong interest in what is the nature of reality, who am I, and what is the nature of reality. And over time, I studied near-death experience, reincarnation experiences, and that all is in my enlightenment book. But I tended to focus quite a bit on extraterrestrial activity because it was a little more solid. They were physical craft. You could kick the tires, so to speak. And so I started reading more and more, and then I took that little newsletter, contactee newsletter, and started studying contact cases. And then I actually, started communicating with other people like Bill Moore in the UFO community and Walt Andrus at MUFON, and got to know most of the people in the field and actually helped some of the people like Stephen Greer, when they came into the field. And so I got a real hands-on experience. And then when I had my own intelligence gathering network, I was able to compare, locally from actual direct contact, seeing, having crafts follow me home and that sort of thing. And so that's how I, really got into it all.
It's amazing. So people see, for example, that you don't have to be special. You just have to kind of study something and learn about it, and then it'll start to take you on its own road.
That's right. You got it.
You say in one of your other articles, which I found really cool, the title is, "We don't own the earth, we share it." Tell us a little bit about why you made that type of statement.
Okay, that's a very important concept for people to wrap their minds around. And ultimately, it's important to read Artie Clark just as a start, her books, and especially More Encounters with Star People, that show you cases that from highly predatory to highly altruistic. And once you understand that, then you can be able to wrap your mind around that there are a lot of extraterrestrial races here. Some of them are more active than others, and the most active ones apparently have bases underground and under oceans and in space, and not only here but on the moon and other moons and planets of our solar system, because they have the technology to deal with the extreme conditions. Whether it's underground or under an ocean on Europa or something like that or whatever. And so, with having all these bases, both the predatory bases, the insectoids, possibly reptilian bases, and Nordic bases, and other types of humans that are operating here with bases that have been here for a very long time, and they've even had a lot, like the insectoids, into our who we are today, and the filling with our genetics for long periods of time that have been involved in our creating of our religions and basically hurting us like a bunch of sheep. So you have all these beings coexisting that have bases here, which is not all that different from what we have on the earth, where you have conflicting governments in conflict with each other, but everybody has to coexist. And my contact people told me that he asked his ETs, the barrel-chested ones, I think, or the Nordics, why, if they didn't like what the insectoids are doing, why don't they do something about it? And he said, that would, if we did, we don't like it, but if we did do something, it would start a hot war, a war between us. And so it's the same. So you got all this jockeying around going on in the extraterrestrial reality, just the same as it does here on Earth. And so we can understand this. And so we don't own the Earth. We're just kind of like a new kid on the block that comes into New York and gets beat up over and over again because he thinks he owns a block by the other people that have been there before, that established there. Until he finally gets it knocked into him, and like the military is learning that, that, attempting to shoot down these beings and whatever and getting one every once in a while, all it does is kind of push allies away and make us more vulnerable to predation by the insectoids and the reptilians.
So the bottom line is we should be, well, first of all, you have to know the difference again between the.
You can't say this is our planet and we are therefore going to defend it, and everybody that comes here better darn sure do what we tell them to do.
Yeah,
and that's what's got the military into such a bind, and the situation has become so difficult that the military, in order sort of to protect the public, have actually destroyed the situational awareness of the herd that allows the predator to operate better in our midst. Doing exactly the wrong thing is to institute an 80-year-old cover-up of the whole of extraterrestrial reality, where the people as a whole can't organize to deal with the predators.
So we're talking about the fox in the hen house.
Yeah, and also the military itself don't realize that they're so arrogant, the top leaders, that the best way that you control a society is autocratic like ours, either straight out autocratic or have a veneer of democracy like ours, is to control the leaders. So I just saw a show on PBS in which the sharpshooter buffalo hunters out west could get on top of a hill with this new gun they got from Remington or some place where it could shoot long distances, and they would lung shoot the leader of the herd, and it would just stand there, become mobilized. It wouldn't fall down. And the rest of the herd, they thinking everything's okay, and they systematically shoot all the rest of the herd because the situational awareness of the herd had not yet adapted to sharpshooters and that somebody operating out beyond their range of perception. And so all these abductees are going through all this grief and trauma and everything, being picked up and treated as animals and experimented on, and thousands, maybe millions, and nobody will believe them. So on top of being, the stigma associated that was deliberately built in order to cover this up, keeps them from talking or communicating, with each other and others. And so not only do they get traumatized by the event itself, it's like women that used to be raped and they were blamed for being raped.
Who are the blue men extraterrestrials?
Okay, that's a more complicated one. If I remember correctly, I'm not sure if they were the ones that said that they were once human like us, but they've just evolved beyond that. Some of these more altruistic beings have evolved beyond predator-prey relationships. They've transcended to a point where it's win-win, not win-lose. And apparently, the blue men are involved on this planet. They don't like wars, and they're according to several different cases that were kind of all connected that Artie Clark has, that they were recovering human bodies in wars and erasing their memories and bringing them back to life and moving them to other planets to live. And so they had their own agendas too and whatever, but they themselves, I'm not sure if they were still in physical form or whether you just create your own physical. When you get to a certain point, you can just create your form on the spot that you want to interact with, just like in a video game. You create your identity in the video game, and then you go about interacting with the video, the video landscape.
Interesting. You wrote an article, this Article 14. It says, and I'll ask you the question, what are the conditions for ethical extraterrestrial intervention?
Okay, basically transparency. Exact opposite of what's happening on this planet. And it's just now happening, but it's becoming more transparent. Something happened in around 2017 in which the New York Times went from debunking this. In fact, they debunked our demonstration, and put some silly stuff that was put on there deliberately to create stigma and whatever. But in 2017, apparently they decided to start printing Leslie Keene's investigative work and whatever about black programs and programs beyond congressional oversight that have spiraled out of control over decades, and where you had people now in control over this secret society within our society that have tremendous power over the rest of us, but there's no congressional oversight or citizen oversight. And so somebody somewhere may have realized that destroying the prey's situational awareness was not going to benefit anybody but the predator. And I think that finally, military finally getting smart, after they got their nose bloody so many times or whatever, and even though they shot down a few, first one was 1974. I got that report on my page, and it was confirmed by Corso in his book several years later, started in 74. So occasionally they bring down one, and quite often the ETs retaliate and the jet disintegrates, and they've lost a lot of pilots over time or whatever. So simply because they think this is our planet, we own this airspace, and therefore anybody moving in this airspace, we have a right to shoot them down. And that's what they were even trying to do with my local friendly ETs in my local area. We watched the jets come out of Moody and chase them and playing cat and mouse with them way overhead like a bunch of bees. And I go on the internet that night or the next day and report on all this. And the next night, the whole place gets smoked up by flares. And so obviously the flight commander didn't like me, going on the internet and spreading this out across the planet, what was happening here in my local area. But they were playing cat and mouse and probably attempting to shoot them down. And these were allies of ours that actually benefit, trying to benefit and help us, deal with some of these other more predatory races. And so why are we protecting and maybe cutting deals with the insectoids because we feel we don't have any other option, costing deals, and at the same time we're harassing potential allies? It's stupid. It's really, stupidity. And maybe people in the military and the intelligence community and in private industry are beginning to realize that they've been had, they themselves have been manipulated, by the predatory races to do the exact opposite for that what benefits humanity out of their own greed and fear.
In one of your most recent articles, I guess it was on the 21st of October of this year, you wrote the disclosure of the CARROT program at PACL. How ET technology works. Is that something that you could respond?
Yeah, that was just recently I became aware of that. I'd heard about and I'd seen those videos of those craft on the power line and whatever, years ago. But I didn't realize that there was a whole commentary of information on that. And of course, like the guy says, the metallic man says in that article, there's been a lot of money spent on disinformation operations on that, much more than you would expect if it was a fraud. And it pretty clearly explains just how the military is able to, and the military and private industry can work together and have a facility right in Palo Alto, California, right in the obvious facility with glass doors or whatever and a guard inside that looks just like any other business. But past that, you have men with machine guns and everything else and super high security and being run by the military. And so it gives some insight, whether it's real or not, still gives insight of basically what's going on. That this is not just a private industry problem, as Congress seems to believe. It's also a military problem because the military industrial complex is all interconnected. And these people go from government into private industry and back again, whatever. Just like Bobby Inman, whatever, who got caught by Bob Osterser on a telephone call talking about all this, and said that, and basically said what Ed Richards said. Ed Richards said, it would be, we have these technologies that take ET home, but it take an act of God to get it out of the hands of private industry and government because there's so much money and trillions of dollars involved. I was right in on that from the beginning because I had developed connections and communicated a lot with John Lear at the time. Mm-hmm. And John Lear, I used to talk, and I even got his letters here. We communicated back and forth. And there is some problems with Lazar's background that was brought out by Stanton Friedman. But if you realize that John Lear is CIA and he probably used to run counterintelligence operations. He ran I think he ran Bob Lazar as a counterintelligence operation because he had heard about S4 and whatever. And so what he did is maybe souped up Lazar's background, and Lazar, came to the attention of Edward Teller and got Edward Teller's recommendation. And between all that, they bypassed security to find out what was going on there. Decided to come out and go completely public, and that involved George Knapp. And I've communicated with George Knapp over the years. In fact, he really helped me with my first exopolitics book by going on the radio station, and which really has a lot of listeners too, all over the world, coast to coast. And then so apparently Bob has shown a piece of the fuel element 115 that was used in the power plant of the craft that was the size of a basketball, and they buried it somewhere out in the desert. And so George Knapp is a very well respected journalist and broke a lot of stories over his lifetime and whatever. So I have a lot of confidence, in spite of all the grief that Bob Lazar gets and whatever. A lot of his stuff is becoming true. And this was one of the latest things, was that when they examined this basketball-sized power plant, it was like a particle accelerator that adjusted the output, determining on what the pull of electricity that was needed. And he says it was a solid composite, with no wires or transistors or diodes or anything like that. It was like a solid uniform composite, and exactly what this Clarinet program was talking about as to the nature of extraterrestrial technologies. And Gary Nolan even has stated that at ET, we build with elements, ET builds with isotopes. And so this isotope technology, we're just now really getting into in the medical profession, and even tracking mammoths all around their range that I saw the other day, using isotopic analysis of where those mastodon mammoths fed. They're able to track their habits year after year after year through the tusks, because the isotopes get laid down, and every area has a different isotope concentration. So we're developing this isotopic technology, but a lot of that detail, that extreme detail that's in that current report, I can see would, give a lot of people heartburn, and so you would necessarily have to create web pages and debunking, disinformation operations to try to cover that up. And so that got me interested enough that I just got today Metallic Man's Majestic Disclosure, Volume 3. I didn't get the first two, but this one is Our Universe. And so I'm going to see what kind of validity he's living out in. He's living in China now, so he's out of range of MJ-12 of the United States pretty much.
All right, let's. We're getting close to wrapping the show up, so let's leave people with something to scare the hell out of them. You wrote an article, Humanity's Low Cosmic Situational Awareness Indicates that we are prey.
Yeah, so we're being farmed, and that's the big thing. The reason that some people are so against disclosure in Congress and elsewhere is that they're afraid that the people will really freak out that they're being farmed. Just like we farm animals, and it really gets you to thinking about how we treat animals. And we're essentially just being treated like animals, and we're being farmed. And maybe a lot of these conflicts that we have and whatever, are being instigated by these predatory extraterrestrials just to keep us fenced in, and all on this planet where they can continue to draw on our genetic and other resources. And Nolan even comes up with that, and Cobert's even being told that, some of the top people that are in the disclosure process now, that they have to pay attention, that their sources are telling them they got to pay attention to the encounter cases. And if anybody wants to study, there's a lot of different Facebook groups and whatever, but that they can get on, and a lot of the abductees communicate amongst themselves and support each other because they're not getting any support from a lot of the rest of society. so then your thing is, well, how the way out of that is, well, it's cover up allows this. So the way out is transparency. So finally, somebody got smart up top. Some of our leaders got smart and realized the only way out of this mess is total and complete transparency. But on the other hand, you still got people fighting, because of their own special interests and the money involved, right, and everything else. But more and more people are coming to this realization that we're being farmed. And in fact, that was my first possible telepathic contact with an extraterrestrial, even though I've never had a face-to-face, is when I was looking up in the sky as a young man, and I didn't always expect what the communication that I had, and it says, we are to you as you are to your garden. I didn't really like that very much. That wasn't what I expected, because I've been reading about, benevolent extraterrestrials and whatever. But so that's what's going on, and that's probably why it's all going on beneath the situational awareness of the general public. So there's a fight for humanity going on, and the destruction of the Earth, in which these technologies can come out and completely turn things around as far as global warming and other destructive aspects on the planet.
All right, we are officially out of time. Listen, Ed, I knew it was going to be a great show. I really have had a great time with this thing today. For those of you who are interested, there's a lot of information here that you can look up about Ed, and I think that you'll find most of it to be pretty easy to access. He's got a lot of stuff up on the internet, and I hope that you get a chance to go to some of the different places.
You just go through the portal website, kamaric.weebly.com, and that will take you into all the books are all free. All the material is free.
All right. For the rest of you, thank you for watching and listening to the Timeless Voyager series podcast. Of course, it's on video players like YouTube and audio players like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many, many more. One thing you can do to support the growth of the Timeless Voyager series is to hit that like button, share, comment, and please subscribe. It really helps to keep the podcast on the internet so that I can keep producing content like the program you've just watched and or listened to. Also, they're very important because these actions trigger the algorithms. We all live in an age of algorithms, and those algorithms help grow the Timeless Voyager channel. And remember, there's no obligation. All the actions are free. So my name is Bruce Stephen Holmes, and I hope that your own personal voyage through life towards the development of your highest potential is a joyous and successful one.
Sister to